entire body with the dust of the lotus feet of great devotees, one cannot realize the absolute truth. One cannot realize the absolute truth simply by observing celibacy, brahmacharya, strictly following the rules and regulations of household life, leaving home as a vanaprastha, accepting sannyas, or undergoing severe penances in water, by keeping oneself submerged in water, or surrounding oneself in summer by fire and the scorching heat of the sun. There are many other processes to understand the absolute truth, but the absolute truth is only revealed to one who has attained the mercy of a great devotee. Purport. Actual knowledge of transcendental bliss can be bestowed upon anyone by a pure devotee. Vedeshu drulabam, adrulabam, atmabhakta. One cannot attain the perfection of spiritual life simply by following the directions of the Vedas. One has to approach a pure devotee. Anyavilashita shunyam, jnana karmadhanagvatam. By the grace of such a devotee, one can understand the absolute truth, Krishna, and one's relationship with him. The materialistic person sometimes thinks that simply by executing pious activities and remaining at home, one can understand the absolute truth. That is denied in this verse. Nor can one understand the absolute truth simply by observing the rules and regulations of brahmacharya, celibacy. One only has to serve the pure devotee. That will help one understand the absolute truth without fail. Rahuganai tat tapasaniyati achejaya nirvapanad vihadva achandasa nayava jalagni suryaya vinamahat pada rajo vishekam. My dear King Rahugana, unless one has the opportunity to smear his entire body with the dust of the lotus feet of great devotees, one cannot realize the absolute truth. One cannot realize the absolute truth simply by observing the celibacy, brahmacharya, strictly following the rules and regulations of household life, leaving home as a vanaprastha, accepting sannyas, or undergoing severe penances in winter by keeping oneself submerged in water, or surrounding oneself in summer by fire and the scorching heat of the sun. There are many other processes to understand the absolute truth, but the absolute truth is only revealed to one who has attained the mercy of a great devotee. So one might think that attainment of the absolute truth is something which may be achieved simply by various forms of processes. Sometimes also we find in the descriptions of bhakti that by following sadhana bhakti, one will gradually get perfection. However, regardless of the process you follow, at one point, if you want perfection in that process, you must get the mercy of a pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of God. To understand the absolute truth is very difficult. Krishna is far beyond our material senses' ability to see or to know. He can be realized only when he himself desires to reveal himself to us. It is not that you can understand the absolute truth simply by having a big intelligence. Neither you can understand the absolute truth by doing a lot of preaching. Simply by that is not sufficient. Or by performance of austerities, penances, or simply by hearing the Vedic literatures again and again, or simply by chanting, or simply by engagement in proper duties according to the varnashram. None of these things by themselves is a cause for the realization of the Supreme Lord when He will face to face stand before His devotees. In fact, the real cause is the desire of the Supreme Personality of God. When Krishna wants to reveal Himself to you, then He'll do so. And if Krishna does not want, then He will not do so, regardless of all of your qualifications. There are many examples of Krishna revealing Himself to the devotee, even though the devotee was not externally qualified. We find the example of Dhruva Maharaj. Although he was a little boy, only 5 years old, he was in the forest meditating on the Supreme. Then, following the instruction of Narada Muni, who gave him a particular mantra to chant, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Within a very short time, Dhruva Maharaj attained success and saw the Supreme. Now, this means that even without being completely qualified, because he received the blessings of Narada Muni, who became his spiritual master, because in fact he received the mercy of a pure devotee of the Lord, he could attain success, although ordinarily success was very hard to attain. We find in other places the glories of the devotees of the Lord are described. We find in the Mahabharata that you cannot understand the Supreme Absolute Truth by mental speculation. He's only understood Dharma, Dharmasya Tattvam, Hitam Guhayam, Mahajana Jaina Gatoksapanta. The Supreme Absolute Truth is only realized, or Dharma, because its principles are only realized, when one follows in the footsteps of the Mahajanas, the great souls. Mahajana Jaina Gatoksapanta. One has to follow in the footsteps. This is also described in the Upadeshamrita Satolbrate. Follow the path which is chalked out by the previous acharyas. Sadhu Margana Gavanam. You should, first of all, come in contact with the saintly personality. One must first of all find a guru. Then, from him, one must inquire into the absolute truth. So Dharma Prachacha. And then, Sadhu Margana Gavanam. Follow that path which is set out by the saintly personalities. Follow that process and procedure to go back to the absolute truth. We find in many, many places it is described again and again how this material world is like a great ocean of suffering conditions of life. But one who has become attached to a saintly personality can overcome these disturbing conditions. This is said, Saeva sadhushu kutaha mokshadvaram apavrita. If one takes whatever attachment he may have, but directs it towards the sadhu, saintly personality, then the doors of liberation fly open, and one may go through such doors and attain perfection of life. So we find that many, many places, we can go on just talking about where in the Shastras it is described about the glories of the devotee of the Lord. And this verse that we are discussing today is one of the more famous, spoken by Jadabharata to King Rahugan. Now, Jadabharata was Bharat Maharaj in previous lives. And in this life, as Jadabharata, he was acting Jada. Jada means dull, like stone. He did not talk to anybody, did not pay attention to anybody, did not follow any rules or regulations or procedures. He acted like a dull person, one who had no outward or external understanding of the material world. And his whole life he did not speak, but just at the time when this King Rahugana was giving too much trouble to Jadabharata, he started to speak. Not because he was giving him trouble, but because the king should know better. Actually, the king's men were looking for somebody who was strong and not very intelligent to carry the palanquin of the king. After all, palanquin carriers can't think too much. They just have to carry the palanquin of the king on their shoulders. And he would ride up on top, and they would just walk. They weren't supposed to think. Therefore, they were searching out somebody who was strong and dull. So they found that person in Jadabharata. Although he was acting dull, his body was very thick and strong. He had a very strong body, although by nature he was acting as a dull man. And he wasn't doing exercises or anything, he just naturally developed that. So they thought this person here is going to become the expert palanquin carrier the king is looking for. Because he has no intelligence, he won't think, therefore he won't be disturbed, just carrying the palanquin. And he's strong so he won't get tired. So they took him. And when Jadabharata was forced to carry the palanquin of the king, he didn't mind. Because part of his pastime of acting like a dull man was that he didn't care whatever activity he was given to perform. He accepted it all and was simply waiting for his death to take place. He was simply waiting so that he could become relieved from the material body and go back home, back to Godhead, which was his whole goal of life. So he wasn't at all concerned with any activity of the material world. So when he was carrying the palanquin, he just thought, all right, this is another thing to do. All things being done in the material world are all equal, more or less. So why should I be concerned? So he didn't complain. But while he was walking, he saw there were ants crawling on the path. So he did not want to step on them. Therefore he was avoiding the ants whenever he was walking. So therefore the walking was becoming not very proper. He was walking this way, that way, trying to avoid the ants. And the palanquin was shaking like this. So the king was very angry and was yelling at his carriers, calling them fools. Don't you understand you should carry this palanquin in the proper way? And the palanquin carriers were saying, we don't know how this has happened. And again, they would move forward, and Jadabharata was avoiding the ants because he thought, I should not step on these creatures. After all, they're also spirit soul. He wasn't thinking about the king he was carrying, or that the king would cause him trouble. And again, the king was yelling, but this time the other carrier said, look, it is him, this fellow here. He's making all the trouble. So then the king started to chastise Jadabharata with sarcastic words to try to straighten him out. Jadabharata, at this point, seeing that the king was in gross ignorance, started to speak for the first time in his life. Previous to this, he had never spoken. Not a word to anybody. Not his father, not his relatives, nobody. He didn't say anything. Now, for the first time, he started to speak. And what he spoke was the most wonderful Vedic philosophy. And the king, immediately upon hearing that Jadabharata was a great philosopher and sage, could understand everything. Because being king means you have to have some brain. So he could understand everything. He understood that his servants had actually captured a great person who was hiding in the guise of a dull person. That they'd made a great offense, forcing him to be the palanquin carrier. Therefore, the king fell on the ground and, grasping the lotus feet of Jadabharata, begged forgiveness for his offense, because he said he did not mind anything of this world except the displeasure of the devotees, because that was not very good. That he'd rather have Lord Shiva's trident than the displeasure of the devotees. So therefore, Rahugana then started to ask Jadabharata many things, many questions. Jadabharata, out of mercy, started to reply to him. And one of the replies is this one, which is today especially significant. It's always significant. He said, "My dear King Rahugana, unless you take the dust from the lotus feet of the devotees and you spread it all over you, especially on the head, you are never going to understand the absolute truth. You're never going to realize the absolute truth. You're never going to understand spiritual life. You're never going to get real knowledge. Unless you do this humble action, you don't get spiritual knowledge. Because it is only by the mercy of the devotee, great devotee. Mahat. Mahat doesn't mean just anybody. Mahat. Mahat sevam dwaram ahorvam muktes. Mahat means a person who can open the doors of liberation for the conditioned souls. There's another statement. Mahatmanas tu mam parta diving prakriti mashrita prasantyana manaso gyatva bhupati madhya. Mahatmas, great personalities, are those who are always engaged under the direction of the internal potency of the Supreme Personality of God. They are always fixed in their mind and their devotion to the Lord, knowing Him to be the original, inexhaustible, Supreme Personality of God. So we find that that original Supreme Lord is manifested through His devotees. The devotees of the Lord, acting as the agents of the Lord, are giving the mercy of the Lord to the living entities. Actually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains hidden. He does not reveal Himself to just anybody or everybody. He will only reveal Himself to those personalities who are fully purified in devotional love. Those persons who actually have received the blessings of pure devotees and have become purified, and who see Krishna already as the Supreme Lord of Lords, Master of Masters, and who is their most beloved object without any second. That is the personality, such a personality. He only may come into the pastimes of Lord Sri Krishna and be revealed, and Krishna may be revealed to him. Only such a personality. Not just any personality. Only such a personality. So, the devotees of the Lord, the Mahatmas, only they have the capacity to give you Krishna like that. Because by their mercy, one becomes purified, one becomes qualified to accept the Supreme Personality of Godhead as all in all. become surrendered to him and go back home back. So therefore, everything comes from the Mahatmas. The Mahatmas. The great souls. So, what is a Mahatma? Well, that's very rare to be found. Samahatma Sadurlabha. Practically, you cannot find in this world Mahatma. But Krishna, out of his extraordinary and causeless mercy, granted us, who are in the most miserable condition of life, rotting in the material nature, granted us, who are low-born, having no good qualities by birth or by achievement, we, in this material world, especially in the Western countries, everywhere nowadays, no exception, had fallen very deeply into the pit of material happiness and distress, engaged in abominable activities, and not even knowing it. Just the action of killing animals and eating them, especially killing cows and bulls and eating them, is a number one abominable activity. That alone is enough to throw you into the lowest classes of existence, malechas. Malecha, not even in the Vedic culture. Meat eaters, low-class persons, that's us. Furthermore, intoxicators. Any variety of intoxication, everybody takes. And gamblers, or especially everybody's running after each other for illicit sex. No rules, regulations, considerations. Maybe rule and regulation from the mundane point of view, but according to the Vedic culture, it's all like cats and dogs. So, from the point of view of Vedic culture, we are all pretty low class. We're not even we would not even qualify as part of the Vedic culture. We would qualify as part of the animal culture, cat and dog culture. So, here we are, part of the cat and dog society. What is to be done? We don't even know there's anything wrong with it. We're just living like that, thinking everything's fine. And Krishna, out of his causeless mercy, Krishna, because he loves the living entities very much, Krishna engaged Srila Prabhupada to come here to this Western world and bring us Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada didn't have to do it. He was already 70 years old, a time when every other person is long retired, waiting for death. 70 years old means very, very old. At that time, nobody does anything new. Persons who are 70 are already fixed in their activities. They just stay in their place. They never do anything new and exciting. Prabhupada, at the age of 70, inspired by the Lord and under the order of his spiritual master, although he didn't have to do it, he was very blissfully living in Vrindavan, in spiritual bliss, fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness. He had his place, didn't require to go anywhere. But he went, after great struggle, just to get a ticket. He went on a boat to America. A boat, not even an airplane. By airplane, the flight takes 20 hours or something like that. By boat, the flight takes 2 months. The boat takes 2 months. Now, I personally have only been on one boat in my life. It was a ferry, and it was across not even the ocean, just the Baltic Sea. And I became so seasick in that 27-hour journey that I swore that I would never, under any circumstances, ever take a boat again as long as I lived in this body. Seasickness is just really horrible. And these weren't even big waves according to the ocean. According to the ocean, this was just like normal. And for me, just the thought of being on a boat and seeing the thing rock like this, I get sick instantly. Prabhupada, at the age of 70, was on a boat that went across the biggest oceans. And he got seasick too, but he couldn't just get off the boat after one day and say, I'll never do that again. He had to stay on it every day. And at that time, he was feeling very sick. So much so, he had 2 heart attacks. 2. Not even just 1. 2. He was very, very sick. He thought he was going to leave his body right there on the boat. The captain was also very much worried because such old persons do not go across the ocean on a boat. It's too dangerous. And also the lady who owned the steamship company thought that this is too dangerous. He should not do it. But Prabhupada was insistent. How insistent is described in the story. Bombay, the man who was the secretary of the lady in charge of the steamship company, his name is Mr. Choksi. And I know this man personally, and I also know the office of the Scindia Steamship Company, having gone there many times. This man's desk is just outside the office of Sumanti Maharaji, the owner of the company. Just some 10 meters away in this very big office. His desk is there. And he described Prabhupada's determination. Prabhupada used to come up to him and ask that he should ask Mrs. Maharaji to give him a ticket because she was known to be helping sadhus in their preaching efforts. So he said, he discouraged Prabhupada as much as he could. He said, you're too old. You can't go anywhere at this age. You're going to get killed on this trip. It's too difficult. If there's a storm, you're finished. You'll not be able to handle it. Prabhupada said, I want to go to USA. This Mr. Choksi was amazed. He was saying, I could not stop him. So finally, I told Sumanti Maharaj. She said, he cannot go, he's too old. And that was it. Prabhupada would not take no for an answer. And he sat down outside the pathway. As you come out of the building, it's a very big building. And there's just some area right next to the stairway. And he was sitting there. So when she came out of her office for the day, at the end of the day, to get into her car, she saw him, and she knew, because she was also a little cultured, she knew this sadhu wants something from me, I'd better give it to him. So she asked, what do you want? He said, I want to go to USA. She said, all right, come tomorrow. And when he came back the next day, she tried anything to convince him not to go. Because if you've never been on a ship before, and you don't know how troublesome it is, with all the seasickness and all that, you won't know the difficulty. So she was trying to explain to Prabhupada in different ways the difficulties he would have to face. But he didn't care. He even thought, if I die on this boat, at least I will die trying to fulfill the mission of my spiritual master. let me try. That's all he said. Let me try and see what happens. So that attempt, he made that attempt. That attempt led to the whole Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore we can understand that making attempt to serve the spiritual master is one of the essential principles of gaining the mercy of the spiritual master. Even though it is very, very difficult to get the mercy of the pure devotee of the Lord, because one has to do something quite nicely. But Prabhupada thought, even at this advanced age, let me try. Let me try even at this advanced age. So therefore, he got on that boat and tried. After his heart attacks, when he was thinking he would just die on his boat, we can imagine that he was not very much lamenting. After all, there's no greater perfection than to die in the service of your spiritual master. But he had a dream that night that he was floating in the ocean, but that Krishna was rowing the boat and threw a line to him and said, "Hold on, I will bring you to the other side. Just hold on. I will bring you. Do not fear." Krishna says this also in the Bhagavad Gita. Aham tam sarva papebhyo mokshaisham ma sucha. Says, I will give you all protection from sinful reactions. Do not fear. One has to learn to become a little fearless and to simply accept that which is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in Krishna's service determination. So Prabhupada just held on tight to the rope that Krishna had thrown him. And he got to the other side. He got to the other side. He survived the journey, which was very difficult. Well, more than 45 days later. So much trouble. So, he started this Krishna consciousness movement alone. He had no help. Nobody helped him. He did it himself. But he wasn't alone, because he was working on the mercy of his spiritual master. Prabhupada always used to say, I myself have no credit personally. I simply try to execute the order of my spiritual master, and by his mercy, there has been a little success. So this is the words of a very humble person. And factually, we accept that, because that is the way in which one gets the mercy of the pure devotees. One simply tries to attempt to serve them, serve their mission. This means Mahat Pada Rajo Visheka. You take the dust of the lotus feet of the great souls and place it on your head. That means one takes the service. The lotus feet refer to service. And when one takes the dust of the lotus feet, this means he's taking the service of that great personality upon his head and accepting the burden of that service as his own burden. This is the way in which one may get spiritual advancement of life, by accepting the burden of the Krishna consciousness movement. That way, he gets the mercy of his spiritual master. Now, we do not mean to utilize these terms in our own behalf. we do not mean to say that those words which are used in the glorification of Srila Prabhupada are to be used for anybody else. It is not that these are just general terms which can be synonymously transferred to any spiritual master. It is not at all like that. That which is utilized to glorify Srila Prabhupada is uniquely his. No one else has done, or ever will do, or could ever do, that which he accomplished in a very short period of time. Somebody may write some poems or something very beautiful, but Srila Prabhupada has established these transcendental literatures as the standards of knowledge for the next 10,000 years. He has given knowledge to all of us, anybody who follows in the line of Srila Prabhupada. Be he 10 years later, or 100 years later, or 1,000 years later, has received his knowledge from that which was given by Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, we owe our entire existence, our knowledge, our activities, everything to him. And therefore, on days like today, we offer him some glorification and praise. It is not possible to properly praise Srila Prabhupada. I don't think so. Words just don't seem to be sufficient. Especially on days like today. Today is Disappearance Day. It is not a day of celebration or jubilation. It is a day of lamentation for all of those who knew Srila Prabhupada. In fact, one feels very much alone without the shelter of the spiritual master. He had given us complete protection and the ability to conquer over this material nature. If there were any struggles or conflicts, he would solve them in a very perfect way. All in all, we felt ourselves very peaceful, protected, under the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. After all, it was his society. He started it. He was maintaining it by his energy. Therefore, we all were very much protected. But only after a very short period of time. He was only preaching in the Western world 10 years. So not a long period of time. It is already almost 10 years since he departed. We felt cheated by fate. We felt cheated by Providence, which took away Srila Prabhupada from our association when we were still too young to have to carry the great burden on our own. Kind of like a child, 7 years old, loses mother and father, and has to go out and work in the world, carrying coal, carrying wood, gradually learning the art of surviving in the material world, and then able to go on that way. But that's not very nice. You don't wish that upon children, that they shall be left in such a circumstance. But that's actually what happened. While still very young, we had to fight our way through this material energy on the instruction of the spiritual master. And even that was not properly understood by some. Therefore, so many troubles arose. There are two ways you can associate with the spiritual master. One is by Vani, and one is by Vapu. We are very much attached to Vapu, bodily association, which means that when the spiritual master is right there before you, then you can understand him, then you can appreciate him. But when he's gone, out of sight, out of mind kind of a thing. Or one is feeling very much depressed or something like this. This is more neophyte understanding, where one understands the spiritual master according to his body, which association may or may not be there, and even when it's there, you may or may not understand it properly. You may have a very sentimental idea, something like this. Not very good. But when one is more advanced, in any case, everybody must understand Vapu. Vapu means, Vani. Vani means instruction. Instruction means the words which are coming from the spiritual master's mouth, the instructions. Therefore, although Srila Prabhupada's personal presence is no longer there before us, his instructions are. His instructions are there before us, and we may follow those instructions and attain perfection of life even in the absence of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada very mercifully incarnated as his purports of these literatures. Therefore, we may still associate with Srila Prabhupada even today through the purports of his books. We personally don't consider anything we say to have very much value. We think the real value is in the books of Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, we are so much encouraging everybody to produce these books and distribute these books. We don't feel that any preaching endeavor is perfect without producing and distributing these books. We feel that all preaching endeavors are more or less doomed to failure if they avoid this major responsibility. Anything that avoids this major responsibility must be a failure, because Prabhupada is incarnating within this material world through these books. And therefore everybody should have a full set of them at home. Even if we do not have a full set, if we even have some. And if we read those books and take those instructions very carefully, we can attain all perfection of life, there's no doubt about it. Even though we may be fallen by all estimations, if we take seriously these literatures of Srila Prabhupada, if we read them carefully, then all perfection of life can develop. Therefore, we are so much pushing these books. Make them, read them, distribute them. In fact, center the whole Krishna conscious society around the producing, reading, and distributing, teaching these books. Because that is the basis upon which everything else can be attained. We are a little fanatical on this point, because we understand it's the only way we can associate with Prabhupada, and that such association is the only way to save anybody in this world. Prabhupada once chastised one of his disciples, saying that what benefit your 2 or 3 minutes of talking will have to some person, but if you give them a book, Krishna consciousness, then they get eternal benefit. Therefore, so much he stressed this distribution. Prabhupada also said these books are meant for you to read. Once in South Africa, in fact, when he received this volume of Srimad Bhagavatam in South Africa, he was looking this book over. He was very much impressed with the painting on the back, where Goddess Kali burst out, the deity, and was chopping the heads of the demons and drinking the blood. He liked that painting very much. He wanted to know who painted it. It's praising that artist. And also, he had read the invocation. The invocation is that verse which they picked in the frontispiece, the first page of the book. Nayana Deha Deha Bhajan Vinoke. So much like that, they picked this verse. He immediately that evening lectured on that verse in Wit University, a very prestigious university in Johannesburg, South Africa. And later on, when the next day after coming back, he was speaking that actually I have written these books for my disciples to read them. But they think that these books are not for reading. These books are simply for distribution. I have not read these books just to make some business. Only selling shall go on. They are for reading first, so that devotees may become purified. Then they may distribute. Then they may distribute. But we have to also know, because we don't really understand what's going on here. Therefore, Prabhupada wanted his disciples to be advanced and thus read these transcendental literatures and distribute them. Of course, if you don't engage in the preaching activity, then what happens is you stop reading, you stop chanting, you stop being blissful in any way. But if one doesn't engage in reading and philosophical development of knowledge, he also gives up. He thinks, what's the use of going on? After all, what is the use anyway? Without proper understanding, without associating the Mahat, the form of transcendental literatures, what is the use of going on? One requires such association. Otherwise, there's no value. So, therefore, Prabhupada spent so much time giving us these books. He also gave us so many temples. But the real point is that what is the use of a temple without transcendental knowledge? In any way, to gain perfection, one must get himself engaged in receiving the mercy of the pure devotees of the Lord. Therefore, this whole Krishna consciousness movement is based on the principle of getting the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. You all may be thinking that we have some independent existence sometimes. But in fact, anything that we can give of any value, we've gotten from Prabhupada. Therefore, we just simply like to be a caretaker, to hand you the knowledge and try to be a via media by which you can get some mercy from Srila Prabhupada. It is said that the grandfather is more merciful than the father. Kinder. The father has to be strict in order to make sure the child does not grow up improperly. But the grandfather, he's very kind, because he does not have that responsibility. So he just gives his mercy to the grandson. So, similarly, Srila Prabhupada is very mercifully giving you all so much mercy. And you should be thankful for that, and always engage accordingly in developing this Krishna consciousness through the literatures of Srila Prabhupada. And in this way, all perfection of life can be attained. And today is a good day to think about Prabhupada, and for the rest of the day you should chant and read Prabhupada Lamrita together in your native language. And then later on, we will also, around 11 o'clock, again have another program, ending with a artik for Srila Prabhupada, and again offering of flowers. We can make Pushpanjali. And then we will have, by that time, hopefully, a very nice feast prepared, which must be offered to Prabhupada at that time. Sometime around 11:30 it should be ready. Very big feast. Very nice preparations. So all your best cooks and assistants should be in the kitchen, working like mad to make a nice feast with satisfaction to Srila Prabhupada. All right, Hare Krishna. So you can now, because I'm not going to understand anything, you should now do some reading and chanting together, chanting of kirtan, some reading of these Prabhupada Namas. Do you have anything already translated? You didn't. I asked you last night. Why didn't you find it? Oh, now you. What was wrong with last night? Why not do things early when you're told instead of waiting for last night? It's here. If it's not, you will just translate directly. All right. Today, so today souls we also sing this song.
Po tradiciji na dan odlaska na dane odlaska velikih duša mi pevamo ovu pesmu.
We are sharing in the mood of Narottam Das Thakur.
Jer uzimamo učešće u raspoloženju Narottam Das Thakur.
Although in our case we cannot do it with the same intensity, but it's pretty close.
Iako u našem slučaju ne možemo to učiniti sa istim intenzitetom, ali je prilično blizu.
So the departure of the great soul causes one to simply lament.
Odlazak velike duše čini da osoba želi da jadikuje.
As it states here,
kao što ovdje kaže,
that unable to attain their association, I must simply weep.
Nesposoban da dostignu njihovo društvo, mogu samo jecati.
Because of not having the association, what can you do?
Jer ako nemate nečije društvo, šta možete učiniti?
One can simply lament.
Možete jednostavno jadikovati, žaliti.
And then he also makes the statement here, I can only break my head against the stone in the anguish of separation.
I također kaže, mogu jedino razbiti svoju glavu od kamena u razočaranosti zbog odvojenosti.
In other words, that one feels so much disturbed by the loss of the association of the great souls that one thinks of just simply committing suicide.
Drugim rečima, osoba se osjeća tako uznemirena zbog gubitka društva velikih bhakta da jednostavno hoće da izvrši samoubistvo.
But that also won't help.
Ali to također neće pomoći.
Because where one goes is not up to us.
Jer gdje neko ide ne zavisi od nas.
And maybe one will also go further away from remembrance of these great personalities.
I možda će neko i dalje udaljiti se od sjećanja na te velike ličnosti.
At least now we have the mission and instructions to fulfill.
Sada u najmanju ruku imamo misiju i instrukcije da ispunimo.
Therefore, on such days we try to make sense out of the departure of such great souls.
Stoga na takve dane pokušavamo da izvučemo smisao tog odlaska velikih duša.
And even if it's not possible, we just remember them and go on down the devotional circle.
I čak ako to nije moguće, onda se sjećamo njih i nastavimo sa svojim predanim službom.
So the life of Srila Prabhupada was for that goal only.
Život Srila Prabhupada je bio namijenjen samo tom cilju.
So we can also chant Hare Krishna. As a messenger of the way Prabhupada chanted.
Yes, naš Srila Prabhupada.